Welcome to the New Hampshire Union Leaders Voters First Forums. My name is Joe McQuaid, publisher of the Union Leader.
And I'm Todd Fahey, State Director of AARP New Hampshire. AARP is a nonpartisan advocacy organization. We're looking forward to hearing candidate positions on important issues. This year, we're focused on Social Security and what candidates will do to ensure that this program remains strong and available for future generations.
If you're watching this live on YouTube, feel free to submit a question. And now, let's hear from a candidate. Politics. Whoa. Welcome, Chris Sununu, to a second round of our Voters First Forum.
Thank you guys for having me. Second round, third round, always happy to come back.
We said first time around that if you made it to the finals, which you have, we would ask you in again, as we have with all the candidates in the general election. Some have accepted our offer, like you. Some apparently too scared to come in.
The fact that someone is running for governor and is unwilling to come in and sit with the union leader is actually bogglesome to me. That boggles my mind. But you got to be able to talk to people. You got to be able to talk to issues, even when the conversations might be tough and the issues aren't always in your favor. You got to be able to make sure people know where you are.
I think it boggles, particularly with your opponent, is not as well known a name as some, including your own, and you'd think he would want to get his name out. But we won't mention it. You may bring it up if you so choose.
He who shall not be named.
Rumpel. Is that Rumpel? So, Medicaid. The expansion. Its opponents say that it's got to lead eventually to a broad-based tax when the federal government doesn't pick up the whole bill. Its proponents say that it has helped a lot of people, especially with the opioid problem, that they wouldn't otherwise get help for. Where does Chris Sununu land these days?
Well, they're both right. If we go down the path of making Medicaid expansion, and that's really what we're talking about here, permanent, there is no doubt that the costs are going to rise at such a level that there'd be no way to ultimately pay for it other than a broad-based tax. There are aspects of Medicaid expansion that have been very valuable. There's no doubt, especially given the opioid crisis that we're in right now and the fact that more people have had access to care. What I want to do is take those positive aspects of Medicaid expansion out, design a system by New Hampshire, get rid of all the waste and the bureaucracy and the regulations that come with that Washington version of the program, and be more efficient so our dollars are more accurately spent to the constituencies that we're looking for and the programs that are important to us here in New Hampshire. If we have to expand it another 2 years to bridge that gap, I'm very open to that. To make it permanent, I think, is going down a very dangerous path. My opponent would like to make Obamacare and Medicaid expansion permanent, but that means you're going to lose all control, you're going to lose cost controls, you're going to have no say on the mandates, and if there's anything that we need to really cherish and focus on in our state, and frankly I think in other states as well, but in our state, making sure that we design the systems that fit our needs, that we have control over our destiny. To keep deferring to giant Washington programs, making them permanent, is just the absolute wrong path for New Hampshire.
Have you found a program out there among the 50 states that would do or come close to doing what you would want to do, or do you have specific people within New Hampshire that you would call upon to design this program?
Well, I think we have the best and brightest here in New Hampshire, without a doubt. And again, it's about bringing those folks in, not just Republicans, but Democrats, Independents, the experts in the field, the folks that can look at what Medicaid expansion has done, where the dollars are best spent. People also have to understand there's a lot of folks that are part of Medicaid expansion that still have limited choices in their health care because they can't get certain individualized procedures or whatever, maybe across borders. Down at Children's Hospital, let's say, we dealt with that with the fact there was a family who couldn't get specialized care for their son down at Children's Hospital, even though they were one of the only ones in the country that could provide it. So Medicaid expansion may be well intended. It doesn't work always in our favor. And again, by designing those systems, having New Hampshire people design those systems, taking the best aspects out of it, bridging those gaps, those are things that we can do long term and we can do cost effectively so as not to increase or entertain a broad-based tax, which ultimately would have to pay for the hundreds of millions of dollars that these programs cost.
Now, of course, you would do this under a single source contract, bringing in this.
I hate single source contracts. Look, there's no doubt about that. You always need to provide options and choice. I mean, we see what's going on with Dartmouth-Hitchcock and the mental health care contract that was railroaded up there to one group. It's been a disaster. It's been mismanagement at its worst. I've called for that, just to jump a little bit into the mental health issue, I have called for that contract to be rebid. Governor Hassan, Commissioner Myers, Colin Van Osteren have all sat on their hands, really. They're asking for weekly reports from Dartmouth-Hitchcock, as opposed to taking real action and making sure that people have choice. So that's just one example of where we always want to provide as much choice as possible.
Single source contracts, they're a fact of life in the state.
They do happen, sure.
What percentage of the contracts that come before you and the Executive Council are single source? And as governor, would you maintain that level or discourage them?
Well, it's a minority of the contracts that are sole source. I don't want to put an exact percentage on it, maybe 10 or 15%. I'm really just guessing, to be honest. Sometimes, for example, you'll have a sole source contract in IT. We may have a program run by the Department of Revenue Administration. The program was designed by a certain company. It's proprietary software. Really, no one else can adjust that system or fix that system other than those that designed it. That's an example where a sole source contract just makes sense and there's no other option. Sometimes in the case what we saw about a few months ago, the substance abuse. There was a lot of controversy over a substance abuse contract that went out sole source. One of my issues with substance abuse is that I think the money is there. It is simply not getting out fast enough. While I didn't like a sole source contract in that example, I wanted the money out there. And I didn't want it tied up any longer. So to put $1 million onto the street with a New Hampshire organization, I believe it was backed by an out-of-state organization, but a New Hampshire organization that had experience to move those dollars forward. That was an example where I'm willing to make an exception. But they really have to be exceptions. And yes, it's not about saying I'm going to keep the sole source contracts or retroactive contracts to a certain percentage. It's about doing the work and making sure that whatever we do with those types of contracts, we're doing it as in a need basis. We're doing it as a case of need, not out of convenience.
So when you talk about the New Hampshire organization that was backed by another organization and that you were willing to make an exception, that's the $1.2 million to Granite Pathways.
That's right.
For the recovery centers. Granite Pathways being a subsidiary of FedCap.
Right, and I believe, if I'm right, I believe FedCap is a group in New York. I think they were bought by FedCap, and I believe FedCap's out in New York City. But Granite Pathways is a local organization, local people. I've been there, I've visited, and so the fact that getting that money onto the streets, I believe are they based in Concord?
Granite Pathways was essentially moribund when suddenly this New York national outfit bought them, in effect. And put some people back in. When you visited, how many people were there?
Oh, this was a while ago. This was more than a year ago. Yeah. I couldn't tell you how many
We
people
had some
was
experience with them in Manchester, where
Okay.
they tried to do something up at a congregational church. It was controversial for several reasons, including zoning, but it disappeared after a year, and there was no more reporting on Granite Pathways until David started reporting on this out-of-state contract. I'm surprised that this is one that you would cite as being a reason for a sole source
Well,
contract.
again, the reason is I wanted the money out there. I want the money on the
And
streets
is it
of New
there?
Hampshire.
Is it out
I got to be honest. I would hope so. I mean, that was done back in April. I would hope it hasn't gotten tied up for any reason. As soon as we approve a contract in the council, there's really nothing holding those dollars back. That would be between the commissioner and the organization itself.
Well, Department of Health and Human Services, DCYF, number of funded positions, mental health positions, contracts that have been out there for a long time, but the reporting is that the money has not gotten to the people
That's
yet.
right. I know we've heard those exact same stories. So again, it's about making sure that having real management. I mean, management isn't just making a decision and walking away. Management is part of following through. So again, that's where the governor and the commissioner and those that have the power to move these things forward, frankly, have been slow. And again, we can pick apart all the individual instances we've seen of that. Unfortunately, we've seen more than one. But you have to follow through. You have to, because by following through, you know what you do? It forces you to look at the end user, the product, the customer, if you will, of New Hampshire, those that need those resources in the case of substance abuse. And it gets you to go to those organizations and say, okay, how have you spent those dollars? Where have they come? Where could we do better? Can we make the contract more efficient? Can we make it more appropriate and tailored to our needs in the state? That's management, and we just haven't seen it in this state.
What is the executive council's role in following through?
To be honest, once we approve a contract, we're kind of on to the next contracts. It's out of our hands in terms of an authority basis. It's really up to the commissioner and the governor and their departments to be following through on that. We don't have the authority to follow through and carry the management of that, so to say. We're kind of on to the next ones, the next 100 contracts we're doing for the next week, reviewing those, processing those. Every once in a while, we will ask for reports back to us. We will say, hey, let us know how this is moving forward or not. Sometimes that's enough. When things are going well, that can be enough. I will say in the case of Dartmouth-Hitchcock, it is not enough because we've seen it not going well. We have proof that there have been countless problems, countless red flags, and that's an area where I said reporting back to the council is not enough. This has to be rebid. It has to be rebid in a different way so as to allow more providers to potentially come in and bid on that contract, to give the people more options so we have flexibility in our system, because at the end of the day, it's about the user. It's about the individual, the families, those that are relying on mental health services or relying on substance abuse services. That's what we have to be looking to. That's real management, making sure that we become a customer service-oriented state. We are not. Right now, we are more like a over-regulated police state, if I may. In a lot of the different departments, health and human services, environmental services, regulations always seem to get in the way of moving things forward and getting the best results. That's not management. That's the change I'm going to bring to the corner office.
What do you mean by over-regulated police state in many departments? Could you elaborate on that?
Sure. Sure. Look, we have become a state, when the state walks into our business or interacts with us, it's not to say, what can we do to help you? You're doing well. What can we do to improve it? How can we lower your healthcare costs? How are you doing with your energy costs? How are you doing with your employment and your workforce? More often than not, the state is coming into our businesses to fine us, to audit us, to tell us what we're doing wrong. Now, of course, we have to make sure people follow the laws and the rules, of course. But we need a whole change in philosophy and mentality where we say, how are we going to drive things forward? We haven't had that in many years. And what's the result? We haven't drawn any major business into this state in 4 or 5 years. And we just saw 600 employees leave in a financial service sector out of Salem. We saw the layoffs going off at Dartmouth-Hitchcock. That's not the New Hampshire a lot of us grew up in. We can do better, but we have to create the right regulatory framework. Doesn't mean just getting rid of every rule, but you have to break down the unnecessary red tape to get it done. Quick example, if I may. I was at a housing project in Londonderry recently. 250 plus unit, low, moderate income housing. A great project, right off the highway on exit 5. And when we're talking about retaining young workers in the state, one of the problems is housing. We don't have a lot of affordable housing for them to live in. It took this developer 3.5 years and $4 million just to get permitted. Not at the local level. Londonderry was very much in favor of it. At the state level. And all of his partners had walked away. They weren't going to invest their money. Thank goodness he stuck with it, and it's a great project. But those types of things, the word is out. New Hampshire is not easy to get projects done. So again, that's just one example of how we have let over-regulation and bureaucracy get in the way of providing the right resources and an infrastructure so we can do things like attract business, so we can do things like bring in a younger workforce.
We are taking questions from our readers live. So if you're watching live right now, you can submit questions online. Here's one from Michael, who says, your opponent says Waterville Valley has been performing poorly. You say it's been performing well. How do voters decide?
It's very simple.
Will you release records? How would voters look?
It's very simple. The fact that we just invested $2.5 million and we're the only resort on the East Coast that's expanding. The only one. The proof is in the pudding. All right? So go up there. My employees are excited. We're growing. We're expanding. And the fact that we're the only one. Now, let's be clear. A lot of resorts had a tough year last year. It didn't snow in the Northeast. My opponent seems oblivious to that fact. And it's not just about ski resorts. It's about the snowplow drivers, the small businesses, the restaurants, the mom and pops. They got destroyed last year financially. They've had to invest all their savings and capital into operational costs this year just to survive. So again, we need a governor that understands the dynamics north of Concord. in the White Mountains through into the North Country. But to understand those dynamics and appreciate them, that's what we really need. But you want to know the success of Waterville Valley, the fact that we're the only mountain that is expanded. We just invested in workforce housing for our employees. We're making those capital investments where others can't. That's proof positive of our success.
Chris, there's an ad by your opponent on television, your opponent or his backers, which says in running Waterville Valley, you've actually cut employment or cut workforce.
We've never laid a single person off because of health care. I've seen that line in that ad, and that's a complete lie. Do we have to manage because of Obamacare? You bet we do.
That's what that is, isn't it?
Yeah, so we have to manage. Obamacare forces us to constantly manage our employees' hours, their seasonality. See, Obamacare is a great example of a Washington program that has not looked at the dynamics of what happens at a local level. And every resort is dealing with this. So there are times when we have to manage our employees down to 29 hours. Sometimes we have to hire 2 employees to do the work of 1. Right? That's not our fault. That's the fault of Obamacare not understanding the dynamics of our business.
And the reason that you have to reduce the hours is so that you do not...
Because otherwise we'd face a $200,000 sledgehammer, what we call the sledgehammer fine. $200,000, that's unsustainable. And by the way, you want to look at the biggest organization that has done this across the board? It's the state of New Hampshire. Right? Every part-time liquor employee can only work to 29 hours. I think we estimate between 2,000 and 3,000 workers in New Hampshire have to keep themselves to 29 hours. That's the dynamics that all of us, the point is, all of us are dealing with this. And it isn't good for business. It makes things more difficult. It's costly. Even the back-end administration of that dynamic is incredibly difficult. But when you face hundreds of thousands of dollars of fines in my business or any of the number of other thousands of businesses in the state that have to deal with that dynamic, I mean, to criticize that tells me that anyone criticizing that tells me they don't understand what business is all about. They don't understand the anxieties of having to manage a business, of having to provide the best healthcare costs, making sure that cash flow is sustainable, not just next month, but next year. The responsibility of putting your name on the front of that paycheck, not just the back. That's a big responsibility that I take, and I take it very seriously. We've never laid a single person off because of health care. We do have to manage, as many of the businesses have to do across this state. And again, I'm very proud of our team. We've done it very, very well. And because of our strong management skills, we're the resort that's expanding. We're the resort that's growing. We're the resort with a success story.
You wouldn't necessarily have to pay a fine, but you would have to provide insurance over the 29 hours.
It would be either providing insurance for hundreds of more employees, which is just, again, not possible. I mean, these are part-time employees. These are seasonal employees that most of which don't even want the insurance. Or it would be, if you don't do that, then you face a tax penalty. Yeah.
When you say
thousands of dollars.
Expansion of Waterville Valley, you mentioned workforce housing for your employees. What does that amount to?
Look, the day before the primary, where all the people out pounding on the trails, I was taking care of my business. I was out closing a deal to buy a small hotel, and we're going to turn it into housing for our employees because it's so hard to find affordable housing, especially in Waterville and in parts of the North Country and the White Mountains. So that was a deal that I was working on. I wasn't out pounding the pavement. I was making sure that we are strong and viable for the future. And I'm very excited about that project, again, to be able to keep 40, 50, 60 individuals and families even right there in Waterville, part of our community. That's important to us. And that's, again, when you treat your employees like gold, it's going to funnel through to the customer. I very much believe that. And we've been very successful with that model, so this is just one part of that.
Not that they're on a scale as big as Waterville Valley, but isn't Attitash doing some expansion this year as well?
With their trail system or lifts, I don't believe so. I don't want to speak out of turn.
You're doing it with trails too?
We had 10 new trails. We're putting in a new lift on a new peak. We bought this workforce housing. We've invested millions of dollars this year, 100% New Hampshire contractors. Other folks running for office talk about how they're going to incentivize to create jobs. Let me tell you something. This summer, I'm creating jobs. I'm investing in the North Country, and I've put my money where my mouth is to grow our business and make sure that we're providing a great product, not just for our customers, but for our employees and for the entire state.
Company down in Salem that's leaving, you referenced 600 jobs. What would Governor Sununu do to try to get them to stay?
Well, it's about providing the right atmosphere, if you will. So as governor, there are 4 or 5 issues we really need to tackle. We talked a little bit about the overregulation of the state. We've made it very difficult. Our incredibly high healthcare costs. As governor, one of the first and foremost things we need to do is start incentivizing more insurers to come into the state. It means changing some laws, breaking down some of those regulations. We have a free market, but we've overregulated that free market to the point where we've de-incentivized new insurers from coming in. More competition can lower prices. That's a very good thing. Our energy costs are way too high. We need a governor that lives and breathes the energy market like I do. At Waterville Valley, we buy our power every 5 minutes on the spot market. I'm constantly watching the market. I understand how it works. And as someone who runs a business that had a $1.2 million electric bill just a couple years ago, just to make snow, that's unsustainable. So when I see manufacturers or businesses leaving, I understand energy is a big part of that. We have to get that under control. These are all different pieces that when you put together, we can finally say New Hampshire is open for business. And it isn't just the businesses here in the state, it's the businesses out of the state that I will go to and I will sit there one-on-one and talk to them, because I live and breathe those same issues they do. I'm a stakeholder in those issues, and I understand what their needs are coming in. When I can talk about getting workforce housing developed, when I can talk about restoring local control to schools, that's a big, at least with me, and I know a lot of other businesses, where are their employees' kids going to go to school? What is the atmosphere they're going to be bringing their business into, right? We have not brought new business in here. That isn't a coincidence. There's a reason for it. And businesses are leaving. We saw it last week. So you got to say we're open for business. That's what I'm going to make a key aspect of our first.
Education and electricity are 2 big areas, and David has written a lot on the energy side of things, including the pipelines being spiked for expansion for natural gas. Does that make Northern Pass to you critical, and should New Hampshire get, as some of your opponents have said, something extra for having this scar go across the North Country?
I would like to see Northern Pass get done in some fashion. There's no doubt. I think we have to make sure that we're interacting with those local communities. We're talking to them. We're understanding their pushes and pulls, their needs, what concerns them. Not everyone is going to be happy with it, I understand. But Northern Pass brings 1,000 megawatts, over 1,000 megawatts of power into, not just into the state, but into the entire New England region. And the economics of it look to save $80 million per year just for New Hampshire ratepayers. That's savings directly to individuals with 0 construction costs. Now they talk about burying the whole line. That's just not feasible, because when you have to bury the whole line, you're looking at another $500 million of cost, and we would have to pay for that at that point, and it makes it uneconomical. So, could we bury some more line? Sure, that might be possible. Can we move the plan a little bit here and a little bit there? Sure, that might be possible too, and we have to work with those communities to find that best solution. But that is, Northern Pass is one piece that I should hope in some form does go forward. It'll help everybody.
Its opponents in the North Country say that Hydro-Quebec is making $8 zillion a minute, and it would be nothing for them to pay for burying the whole line. Are you aware of Hydro-Quebec's financial position?
I'm not, but I'll say basic economics dictates if it made economic sense for them to do it, I'm sure they would do it, because every day that goes by it's not getting done, they're losing more money. So the economics will drive a lot of this. There's no doubt about that. Look, we're looking at 1,100 megawatts of clean, renewable energy coming into this state, where we, to reference your earlier question, where we would have a 10% power purchase agreement, which essentially guarantees us the lowest price at any given time. The fact that New Hampshire only uses 9% of New England's power, but we get a 10% power purchase agreement, it's right in line, and that sounds fair to me. If you start pushing that to 30 or 40 or 50%, it sounds good on paper, but it's not feasible. The economics are going to dictate a lot of the project. The economics I care about are what the ratepayers are going to save. And let me tell you why that's important, if I may. We're becoming a more aged state. We're silvering. I don't say graying. We're silvering. But as we become older, we have more folks on fixed incomes. We still have those on the lower income bracket. We are not providing them the financial flexibility to remain in this state, to remain homeowners in this state. We do have a high property tax base here, but when our fuel costs and our energy costs are so high, we're ignoring the needs of those on fixed incomes, specifically the elderly. So anything we can do to get those costs down is a positive thing, and is going to really retain a better quality of life for everybody here in the state.
When you talk about lowering health care cost. Chris, you seem to focus pretty heavily on competition among insurance companies.
Sure.
But no matter how many insurance companies you have, the costs are ultimately going to be driven by what the providers charge.
That's right.
What can you do to lower the cost of healthcare at the hospital?
So a couple things. Number one, I'm a big believer in transparency, whether it's in government or costs of healthcare or just knowing what you're paying for a box of cereal, frankly. You got to know your options. So some of the things that have been put forth, that we have some apps now and things like that that look where you can scroll through and say, hey, we're going to get this procedure, and here are all the hospitals within 50 miles that provide that procedure. Here's the cost. Clear and easy transparency of cost so that the individuals can make better choices. As more folks get involved in that system, and while the system is up and running for a lot of folks, not everybody, the more people we get involved, as we get that from 10% usage to 20 to 30 to 40%, that is essentially creating competition, right? Because those that are higher cost are going to get less customers, and their prices are going to have to drop to compete. I do like also the model of a lot of these smaller independent groups. I'll say Convenient MD is a good example. These are small. They're just run from basically 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. They're low-cost alternatives for people. They're not 24-hour emergency room services, but during certain hours, the primary hours of the day, they provide a very low-cost, easy access option for folks. Again, creating more competition in the system and ultimately bringing price down. Just a couple examples of things that I think we need to promote to keep making sure that the competition stays there and prices keep dropping. To your point, and it's a good point, very much on the provider level as well as the insurance level.
But how do people figure that out? Because if you walk into a Convenient MD, it doesn't say that, you know, a flu shot's $25 or
Right.
checkup's $150 versus walking into
We should get them
government.
put onto the system, right? I mean, I'm not saying you just necessarily mandate it, but the more people that start using that system, well, pretty soon, and I'm not picking on Convenient MD or XYZ healthcare provider, more of those healthcare providers are going to see the need to put their information out there.
That's the app system.
Yeah, whether it's an app system or something you see online or whatever it might be, just all the different methods of publicizing what your costs are and being true to those costs, making sure you account for all the taxes and fees and everything else that comes into play. I mean, and people say it can't be done, but I say it can. Whether you're talking about an appendectomy to get your appendix out, all the way down to the $300 Tylenols that we hear the stories about, right? Let's just get that transparency out there, and the more people that partake in it will force those providers to also get involved, because pretty soon that'll be the way that people are shopping for their health care, and that's a good thing.
Well, on healthcare, could you try to characterize for us what a New Hampshire-centric solution for the Medicaid expansion would look like? Because you're saying, you know, you might tolerate the current situation with the New Hampshire Health Protection Plan, as it's called, for maybe 2 more years, but then you want a New Hampshire solution. Well, doesn't the waiver that allows New Hampshire to have its work requirements and private insurance market fund the expansion, don't we already have sort of a New Hampshire solution to it? And
No.
would your New Hampshire solution find a way to reduce the expansion
Yeah,
from
no, I would
50?
say I would say we definitely don't have a New Hampshire solution. The fact that we were dissuaded from putting in a work requirement, and let's be clear, by a work requirement, you could have been donating some of your time at a nonprofit. You could have been out looking for a job for a few hours a week. It was a very minimal requirement. The whole point of expanded Medicaid is to provide a bridge to get people back into the workforce, right? So in theory, as we have these incredibly low unemployment rates, which we do have now, but an incredibly high number of people that are on expanded Medicaid that don't have other options for health care, those two things don't really match themselves, right? So people are getting into the expanded Medicaid, but they're not getting into the private sector workforce as fast as we'd like. We need to provide New Hampshire incentives and programs that help provide that pathway for them. Don't just hand them the program and say, thank you very much and good luck, but provide a pathway to get them back into the workforce.
So the work requirement is the big
I think a work requirement would be a big piece. I think providing, again, taking the substance abuse aspects of expanded Medicaid, which have been very successful, we can do them much more efficiently if we can control those dollars, control those programs, and design programs that are important to us. Medicaid expansion was not designed with substance abuse in mind. It's just an aspect of it. Yet it's one of our biggest healthcare crises. Let's have that flexibility, right? Let's have that. And today it's the substance abuse crisis. Maybe 10 years down the road it's something different. But so it's important to have that flexibility as opposed to just saying we're going to make the Washington program permanent. That is never an answer for New Hampshire.
And you think you could get Washington to agree to the...
A strong governor can get them to agree. Absolutely. That's the power of using the influence of as not just as a single governor, but working with other governors in cooperation to say, look, if this is going to come this way, we need to see this type of flexibility. And if they're unwilling to do it, being able to pull those aspects out of the program, design them ourselves, so ultimately we can say no to the bigger Washington program because we already have the best parts of it in place and we're controlling it here in the state. We can use it, think of it this way, I think expanded Medicaid can be potentially used as a very positive bridge to designing our own system, but to make it permanent, it's a very dangerous pathway.
Public funding of education in New Hampshire, you satisfied with it? Is it going to have to be changed?
If I may, K-12 or the university system?
University, they got
yeah.
a school board.
Well, I'm not satisfied with the fact that the funding formula is still sitting in the courts. I'm a big believer that we need a constitutional amendment. I think all the governors before me have agreed that that is important. None of them have been able or willing to get it done. I am. I think we, again, have to turn the power of the funding back to the legislature, because that's our voice as individuals, as citizens, right? We have an incredibly large legislature here, incredibly representative legislature. Let's let them use the power of the people to the best advantage to decide how that funding is going to go, give them the flexibility. The fact that my opponent wants to keep all the control of our schools in courts, keeping the control of our kids' classrooms in the courts, that makes no sense. And again, I was appalled when he said that, but that's his position. So again, I'm a big believer in local control. I'm a big believer that parents and teachers need to have the ultimate say in what's going on in their kids' classrooms. Every community is different, and to allow our legislature to help manage that process is a good system. It's a good feedback response system. They have that flexibility. Courts don't have flexibility. They're not willing to look at what's going on across the state to make the best decisions for all of us. The legislature does, and that's where it needs to be.
Well, as far as getting the courts out of it, do you favor the more moderate proposal that Governor Lynch floated, which was to get a constitutional amendment that would allow targeting of aid? Or do you favor the more nuclear option of a constitutional amendment that simply obliviates the Supreme Court's right to intervene on
I don't know. I don't know what the best answer is there. I think we need to get something done. I'll say that. If I think we just have to start talking to the legislature and talking to the communities, talking to the school administrators, finding out what their needs are, and then we can design. I don't want to say exactly what the wording of the constitutional amendment would be, but we need to get it done to be sure. And again, you need to go to the locals and the individuals to find out the best answers for the state of New Hampshire.
Is abortion pretty much off the table based on your and your opponent's positions on same?
Oh, I don't know what you mean by that. Is abortion off the table?
As an issue, you both favor funding of Planned Parenthood.
I've supported look, I do not support the taxpayer funding of abortions. The Planned Parenthood contract we put forward was for healthcare purposes. It's for low-income women and kids and families in my district. It was the only option we had. I voted for it many times, as has every governor before me, by the way. Even the Republican governors, Merrill and Gregg and Sununu, they all voted for the exact same contract, for the exact same funding, because it's health care for women. And I'm not going to let politics stand in the way of that. I'm just not. So I would like to see more options. I would like to see more providers come to the table and be willing to bid on that. And that's something I'm going to focus on, not just with that contract, but to what we referenced earlier, making sure that a lot of these contracts have competition. That's a good thing that can help, again, lower prices and give better options to individuals across the state. But that's what that was about, and I stand by it 100%.
If you could go back, and now that you know all the political consternation that no vote caused, and you look at all the money that Planned Parenthood is currently spending against you, even though you voted for the contract.
I've never cast a single vote for political purposes, and I never will.
Would you change your mind about that?
No, because at the end of the day, we got funding out to women and families that really needed it, that had no other option. See, the myth of Obamacare, if we can expand this a little bit, is that everyone's going to be insured. They're not. We have 70,000 people in the state still uninsured, a lot of which live in my district, and a lot of those low-income women and children rely on that type of funding, which right now the only option is to go through Planned Parenthood for basic health services, whether it's checkups or cancer screenings, whatever it might be. So I would never put politics, and I knew casting that vote this year might be the end of me politically, as people said. I don't care. It's about making sure that those women and families have those funds. I've stood by it since the day I came into the council. Now, last year when we took the no vote, the governor knew I was in favor of it, but she wouldn't provide any more information. because we had all the videos and all that kind of stuff. And we said, let's do an investigation. Let us know what's going on in this state with this organization, regionally and locally. She refused to answer any questions. She refused to ask any questions and provide us the proper information. So you can't go forward with that, of course. But she knew I had voted for this contract many times before. And once all that got cleared up by other states, because Governor Hassan sat on her hands, refused to do anything about it. Once that all got cleared up, I moved forward, and I said yes this year because, again, it's something I've supported in the past, and it's the right thing to do.
Do you think it's okay that Planned Parenthood can take taxpayer money and then have their super PAC target?
Look, I've never been a fan of the political arm of Planned Parenthood, and I've been very critical of that political arm because it's negative. It's an attack arm. It's not out there promoting what's great, what's good about their organization. It's out there primarily to attack candidates, to tear people down. That's the kind of negativity I think we've all had enough with, whether you see on the national level or, frankly, even my opponent putting out those personal attack ads. That is not what elections are supposed to be about. That is not what finding our best leadership, our best leaders for our state should be about. We need to talk about issues. So I've taken a lot of exception to the political arm of Planned Parenthood because, frankly, I just think that we need to talk positively. We need to talk about what we're going to do, what our plans are, and not just tear each other apart on a personal level.
Realistically, the money that you vote for Planned Parenthood to do these health services is money that they don't need to fund their abortions. So isn't it, in fact, taxpayer money is going to fund the Planned Parenthood organization, and money is fungible. If they got $2 million and $1 million comes from you and the other $1 million is privately raised and some goes for abortions, I think 90% I've read is the Planned Parenthood budget. Most of it is for abortions. When you say you are against taxpayer funding of abortions, isn't that rather disingenuous?
I don't think so. I know a lot of people talk about the fungible aspect of the money, but let's understand how this works. The state doesn't just hand Planned Parenthood a check. Folks come in. A young woman might come in for a basic health physical and a cancer screening. She might bring her kids or her husband. Men take part in these services as well. They get their they get their treatment. They get their services. Planned Parenthood records it all and asks the state for reimbursement, and the money comes back for those services. So we can talk about money being fungible, and I know in some instances it may be, but in this instance it's a direct reimbursement for healthcare services. So I don't buy into the fact that all this money is completely fungible.
And what were these poor people doing while the Planned Parenthood in this respect was not being funded?
We have had this funding since the 1970s.
No. You voted against the last contract.
Not a single person was turned away from Planned Parenthood. I think that might be your point. And Planned Parenthood even admitted not a single person, that's an important point, was ever turned away for service in the 1 year that it went unfunded because the governor... I assume Planned Parenthood was covering it themselves until, again, all of the investigations were cleared up and again, the money was reimbursed ultimately once it was cleared.
Emergency infusion of federal funds.
I've heard that too. That's between them and the feds. I honestly don't know a whole lot about that. And keep in mind, the vast majority of Planned Parenthood's funding still comes directly from the feds. I mean, that is a big part of their funding. But in this state, as in many other states as well, we have what we call Title X money. It's been around since the 70s. Everyone has approved it before me. We didn't see all this stir up when Governor Sununu voted for it 3 times, or Governor Benson or Merrill voted for it a couple times, Governor Gregg. All the same contract, all the same wording. Everything was the same. But I understand it's more of a political hot topic now. I have to kind of shoulder the brunt of that political firestorm, but I don't mind, because at the end of the day, it's about making sure that these women and families have those services. It's what all the governors before me understood, and it's again, providing more choice. I think that's a good thing.
So is abortion off the table as an issue between you and your opponent, since you...
Well, we're not going to make abortion illegal in this state, if that's the question.
Well, my question to you is, do you have any limits on abortion if you were governor that you would...
I am not a believer in late-term abortions. If that's the question, no. I think we have to look at that.
I'm not putting words in your mouth.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find out
Yeah,
from
no,
you
so if you're-
where you stand on abortion.
Yeah, I'm a pro-choice candidate. I am not a believer in late-term abortion. I think that's something that, as most states have, I think we have to look at. Something what I would also like to see is, we're one of the few states where we don't know where these procedures are taking place. I think it's important that we have that data and have that information so we can provide better educational services.
You don't know where the abortions are taking place?
We don't know the numbers and the location and times of where we don't get very accurate reporting information. As I think we're one of the few states that are not very accurate about our information. I think we have to make sure that they are providing that information where they are.
Some more regulation, eh?
Well, it's not about more regulation. I think it's just about a reporting requirement. Because again, the whole point is, all of us can agree the ultimate goal is to reduce the need. Reduce the desire, reduce the want, reduce the number of people that are walking in the door for that procedure. I think everybody across the board would agree with that. But it happens with better education, whether you're talking about teen pregnancy.
At all.
How?
That everybody would agree with you that reducing
the amount of unwanted teen pregnancies or things like that?
No. Reduce the need for abortions. There's a great segment of the population who has no problem with abortions whatsoever. And uses it as merely another form of birth control. And to say that's not the case is
again,
astonishing.
that might be a minority of the population, but I think most people would agree. When we're talking about unwanted teen pregnancies, things like that, let's find out where these procedures are taking place so we can provide more education, we can provide more services to the youth, and especially in those areas. Again, so we're keeping that number as low as we possibly can.
They're taking place just off of Chestnut Street, 2 blocks from Main Street in Manchester, and there are pickets on a regular basis out front. And I think there's some law regarding the picketing that is under challenge in this state and others.
The safety zone.
About a 25-foot buffer.
Buffer zone
Right.
issue, yeah.
Yeah. And where is that now?
Do you support the concept of a buffer zone, or do you think it's a free speech violation?
In terms of, you're asking for the exact footage of the buffer zone? I'm not sure what you're
Any
asking.
buffer zone, 25 feet, 10 feet?
Well, you have to keep people safe. Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And so you do have to keep people safe, and you have to make sure people have, adequate pathways and all that kind of stuff. So whatever we do has to be done within
You
reason.
have to keep the unborn safe?
Do I have to keep the unborn safe? Look, I'm a pro-choice candidate. I believe that a woman and a mother has the right to make the best choices for their family. I'm not for late-term abortions. I think there are strides we can make in that area.
What's the term beyond which you would be against it?
You mean in time-wise?
Late term, yeah.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I think I've seen a couple
You're
different...
against late-term abortions, but you don't know
I mean,
what
we
that
could
term
generally say
should
third
be?
trimester, right? But we can also look at, there's some other folks that would like to see it back to 20 weeks and some folks that want to see it up at more. So again, I think we can look at those options on the table, but I'm not going to put a timeline on here.
If the baby is viable?
Oh, I don't know what that means. What do you mean if the baby?
You don't know what viable means.
Well, I know how you're using in that term. Again, I'm not going to put a time limit or specifics on exactly what we need to talk about. I just think it's a discussion that could be had in the state, and there's nothing wrong with a good discussion. And we can again let the legislature ultimately decide where we want to go with that, and we can see what comes
I
of it.
thought it was between the mother and the doctor.
In terms of,
And now you want the legislature involved
come on,
in the term?
you're
It's
asking me
not- come
about
on, that's
you're
okay.
asking me about late-term abortions, which
I'm
I've said
asking you,
I
if
think
the
is something we need to
baby-
talk about.
If the baby is viable, are you against abortion? Viable, the ability to
I think we need.
live outside the
I'll
womb.
simply say we need. I think a lot of options are on the table, and a lot of discussion has to be put on the table in terms of what that time length might be.
Chris, the Democratic Party today is holding a press conference to bring to the attention of the voters that your brothers and you previously are partners in a lobbying and consulting and public policy group called Profile Strategy Group.
I've never been part of Profile
You've never
Strategy
been
Group.
involved in Profile
Never
Strategy?
been. I know.
What is it?
That's it's a company that my brothers run, but I've never been part of Profile
All
Strategy
right,
Group.
we were misinformed on that basis. But going with the premise that it's your brother's group, they are calling for the Profile Strategy Group to release their client list to prove that none of their clients had contracts that came before the Executive Council that you voted on. Do you think that's a reasonable request, and do you think it's a conflict for you to approve contracts for clients of the profile strategy?
I honestly couldn't tell you who their clients are. It's a private company. I was never associated with it. My sister is an interior decorator. I'm sure she has clients too. I have lots of brothers and sisters in lots of different businesses. My sister runs the Museum of Art in Portsmouth, so does that mean we shouldn't be doing anything for the arts community? Look, I think we do a very good job of disclosing all of our potential conflicts. I've recused myself from numerous contracts. Anything that comes before me that provides a direct conflict of interest, I'm very open about that. I honestly couldn't tell you who a lot of their clients are. So,
what do you think about the request to release the client list? Do you think that's
No, I don't think that's reasonable at all. Unless we're going to require every candidate to release every business that every immediate family member in the state does business with. And again, we have disclosure forms, and we fill them out I've been very clear, very upfront about everything on the disclosure form. They're grasping at straws here. I mean, if that's an argument the Democrat Party is making, another attempt to not talk about issues like Medicaid, like workforce, like jobs, like energy. Why aren't the Democrats talking? Why isn't my opponent talking about these issues? Why has my opponent avoided me in debates? Why is my opponent so afraid to get up and talk about his plan for the state, instead going personal and attacking my family? We've seen all that. That is below the dignity. Those type of attacks are below the dignity of New Hampshire politics. New Hampshire politics is about public service. Whether you're running for the planning board, whether you're running for the House of Representatives, we all know someone, or maybe we ourselves partake in it. It isn't what defines us. I don't believe in career politicians. I'm an engineer, and I run a ski resort, and I have my family. Those are my priorities in life. What I'm trying to do now is get this state back on track. And when we do it, I'll go back to the private sector, hopefully with a state that has restored local control, that has created more jobs. The Democrats want to talk about my family and all these nonsensical attacks. It's beneath all of us, frankly.
All right, apparently he's for the train because he just said he wants the state back on track. So
Oh, Lord.
We have him on that one. But why did you not, this big favor of transparency, openness in the government, why have you not responded to the New Hampshire Bar Association questionnaire?
I don't know. I get 100 questionnaires. There's some questionnaires I send back and some I don't. I couldn't tell you exactly why.
Really?
Yeah, the bars, I'm not sure.
Oh, well, they had
particular?
specific questions. One had to do with how you would appoint judges, and if you would continue to use the form that the past couple of Democratic governors had, which is really letting the Bar Association do it.
So I can't tell you exactly why we didn't send that questionnaire back. I can tell you on that question of picking judges. Again, I'm not a lawyer. I believe in bringing good people in, to be sure. It's not just the Bar Association, but it's people that that I trust, that understand the needs of the state when it comes to what we need to see behind the bench. Now, I take it a step further, and I want to talk to the local communities. I want to talk to local prosecutors or the local districts, or frankly, other judges, in terms of what their needs are in their communities when we're talking about circuit and district judges. Getting a wider variety than just a closed group of political confidants, which is what we've had over the past few years, that's how we're going to get the best results in the state. And that's the next level that I think we need to take, making sure that we're doing our due diligence in vetting the best judges for New Hampshire.
So if you're governor, you're going to have 3 appointments to the New Hampshire Supreme Court.
I am?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know that, but okay.
Well, at least 2 and probably 3. Maybe it takes a second term for 3. And the reason for this is there's a mandatory retirement age.
You're saying because they're coming up to retirement. Okay. I don't know the ages of all the Supreme Court.
No, I didn't think you were going to indict them and throw them out.
I wasn't sure what we were referring to there.
That may be another story. No,
No.
the mandatory retirement age is 70 for the.
And we have a couple of judges. I know we have at least one. I didn't know of the other 2, to be honest.
And are you in favor of that mandatory retirement age of 70?
I wouldn't look to change it.
Really? It was written 200 years ago?
Well, so wasn't the Constitution, and that was a pretty good document. So.
Yeah, but the life expectancy has gone considerably beyond what people thought was reasonable versus senile 200 years
if people want to
ago.
look at that, changing it, I'd be happy to entertain the conversation. I've never really thought about it, but I've never heard anyone complain about it, to be honest. But
I mean, you got presidential candidates who are that old. You're supporting one of them. Isn't he like 70 or
I don't know.
something?
Yeah, no, I don't know. If you want to look at whether we should move the mandatory retirement ages for judges, I suppose we could look at that. I really haven't given it much thought about, though, to be honest.
I'm happy to do the Bar Association's work. 'Cause I got their newsletter yesterday, and right on the front page, your opponents, 2 of them.
Look, I've said,
Responded.
we've had judges come before the executive council. I've said yes to a lot of them, and I've said no to some of them, right? That's our
Who did you say
job.
no to?
A few. I have I mean, there was a woman named Judge Carbon, Sue Carbon, came before us. I know I think I voted against her. I mean, I could go through, it's been 5 years, I could go through the list. It's not a big list. I think most of the judges that come before us are pretty darn good, but I have had to say no to a few, and a lot of times they get through anyway. I don't know if we've ever had enough votes to say no to them completely, but one thing I won't be is a rubber stamp. I mean, that's what we've seen with Colin Van Osteren. He is a rubber stamp for Governor Hassan's mismanagement and agenda. There you go.
Took an hour.
But I mean, really, I'm not going to be a rubber stamp. The people of the state ask for discernment and judgment. That's what leadership is. So to be a rubber stamp for the Bar Association or some other group, if they're upset with me because I said no to some of their recommendations, well, that's my job. I mean, why do we have an executive council? Why don't we just let the Bar Association pick all the judges, or whatever association that might have an issue? So I don't want to pick on them per se, but so no, I just think we just have to have leadership is about making the best decisions for the people of the state. Sometimes it means saying no. Sometimes it means using your expertise to provide a better pathway.
Do you think the commissioners should serve at the discretion of the governor?
I like the system we have, the fact that they're kind of rolling commissioners. I'm sure I'll get frustrated with it when I become governor, and you can't just put your own people in immediately. But it forces our government, which is a good thing, to work across party lines, maybe to work people you're not always comfortable with. Now you have to hold them to a standards and accountability, and they have to meet those standards and accountability not just for the governor, but for the council, for the legislature. And again, that's the onus on them to meet those standards, and we should have high standards for them. I think we have a lot of good people in the state that frankly just have been, I would say misled, but I'd say unled. There's been no leadership providing a pathway forward, a philosophy for the state, a philosophy for their departments, what we're trying to achieve, not just in the short term, but the long term. These are things that the state is lacking now. The fact that we think about, people are thinking about voting for Colin Van Osteren so we can keep going down the same path, again, baffles me. We have to have a change in this state, and that comes with leadership, and if there need to be personnel changes, we absolutely need to look at that.
With the unemployment rate so low, the median income rising at among the fastest rates in the country, business tax revenue doing very strong.
And nearly doubling of the number of people that require government assistance.
Why is that happening at the same time as all these?
Well, look, Medicaid expansion. We've disincentivized people from entering the workforce, right? A low unemployment number is an antiquated way of looking at the success of your economy, right? You have to look at the number of people in the workforce, the number of hours you're getting out of them, the viability, the productivity. These are all things that we need to look at. We have a lot of economic factors and indicators in the state that are not as good as they could be when you look at growth, GDP, and things like that. So when you see businesses leaving the state, no businesses coming into the state, I'm not trying to be doom and gloom, but just looking at a low unemployment number, that tells a mere fraction of the story. The fact that we've nearly doubled the number of people that require government assistance, and the Democrats tout that like it's a good thing. I can't think of a worse metric. People want jobs. They want to be out there. They want to have individual responsibility. They want to take care of their families and not just rely on the government to take care of them. The Democrats see it in a very different light. I think that's one of the clear contrasts between myself and my opponent. I want to get back to New Hampshire values, empowering people, empowering the individual, giving them the tools and the pathway to take care of themselves so they're not relying on the government. Nobody wants that. But we've nearly doubled it in the past 10 years. That's a dangerously negative metric for this state. And we have to be able to look at that honestly and figure out what we're going to do to start bringing that number down, getting more people into the workforce.
David, you got enough there for 12 stories.
And I think we're out of time.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
I could sit
for
here all
coming
day.
in.
This has been so much fun.
Well, we can do that, but we're going to shut the TV off now.
Well, thank
These
you, guys.
guys
I do
have day
appreciate it.
jobs.
Thanks.
As
know
do
what
I.
they do.
Trust me.
Yeah.
Trust
You
me.
do?
Yeah, waterville.com. Buy your season passes now. Don't forget.
Is there a break, early purchase?
There was. I think Columbus Day was our last break, and then we still have a price reduction through November 30th, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah. which
Well,
is
just
exciting.
one last quick thing. The cameras aren't rolling, but when you say the
Yes,
number
they are.
of people on public assistance has doubled in the past 10 years, what exactly are you?
Medicaid. Look at the Medicaid
That's only
numbers.
50,000, and
No,
there
no,
were
no.
100,000 on it to begin with.
No, 10 years ago we were like, I want to say we're at about, well, I mean, maybe 80 or 90,000, and we're at maybe 150 now, something like that. I think we've increased 80% in the last 10 years.
So it's 80%, not 100%.
Yeah, I don't, it's,
He's running
yes.
these facts and figures.
Yeah, I mean, and you should check me on that to be sure, but maybe it's 80%, but it's nearly doubled is
I
my
see what
point.
you're saying. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, just to be accurate.
Great.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you guys, appreciate it.
So you get